Hello learners, today we are going to read a thrilling story written by Ruskin. The story is named A Face in the Dark. The story is set in Simla, a town in Himachal Pradesh, India. The story was originally published in 2004. You will see that the story is very short and simple in terms of plot and language, but it leaves a thrilling impact to the reader's mind. Ruskin uses some supernatural elements, which are eerie sound of the pine trees, batteries of the torch running out, lantern swinging in the middle of the path. So these all elements foil to create a supernatural atmosphere. The story begins with ordinary narration of daily occurrences, but it gradually turns out to be intriguing and a thought-provoking one. So let's get started with reading the story without much delay. Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to his school late one night on the outskirts of the hill station of Simla. At the very beginning, we are getting introduced to Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher. Anglo-Indian means he had mixed breeding. One of his parents was British and the other was Indian. And his school located on the outskirts of the hill station of Simla. He was returning to his school one night. He dwelled in his school campus, might be. So his school was located on the outskirts of the hill station of Simla. From before Kipling's time, the school had been run on English public school lines. Here Kipling refers to Rudyard Kipling, the writer of the Jungle Book, So from that time, the school was run on English public school lines, means the students would come from wealthy families. And the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, wore blazers, caps and ties. The boys would wear blazers, caps and ties. Life magazine, in a feature on India, had once called it the Eton of the East. Life magazine is a famous American publication. It once featured on the school that it was the Eton of the East, means it was compared to the Eton College. Eton College was a famous boarding school for boys in England. The school where Mr. Oliver was teaching was like the Eton College. It was a school for the elite class. Mr. Oliver had been teaching in the school for several years. The Simla Bazaar, in its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school. And Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, returning after dark, when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. So there was a bazaar called the Simla Bazaar, which was 3 miles away from the school. And Mr. Oliver, as he was a bachelor, he would enjoy the evening in the bazaar and would return late in the evening. While returning from the bazaar, he would take a shortcut to reach his school. And the shortcut way goes through the pine forest. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees made sad, eerie sounds that kept most people to the main road. When a strong wind blows, the pine trees produce eerie sound, means something that is peculiar. The trees produce some sad and peculiar, terrific sounds that can make you nervous. So that is why people do not take the shortcut and take the main road. But Mr. Oliver was not a nervous or imaginative man. Mr. Oliver was not a nervous person and he did not over-imagine anything. So he did not have any fear. He carried a torch and its gleam, the batteries were running down, moved fitfully down the narrow forest path. He also carried a torch. And coincidentally, that day, the batteries of the torch were running out. When its flickering light fell on the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock, Mr. Oliver stopped. Now, on his way, Mr. Oliver met a boy who was sitting on a rock. So Mr. Oliver stopped. Boys were not supposed to be out after dark because he was worried why a boy was sitting there after dark. He should not have done so. That's why he stopped to inquire what the matter was. "What are you doing out here, boy?" asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving close so that he could recognize the miscreant. Mr. Oliver stopped and asked the boy, "What are you doing here?" And he asked it sharply. He went close to the boy so that he could recognize him. Here, miscreant means the wrongdoer, a person who does wrong. But even as he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. The boy appeared to be crying. Mr. Oliver felt that the boy was crying. His head hung down, he held his face in his hands, and his body shook convulsively. The boy was crying with his head down between his arms. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. Mr. Oliver found it quite uneasy to hear the weeping sound of the boy. "Well, what's the matter?" he asked, his anger giving way to concern. Initially, he got angry, but now he is concerned. "What are you crying for?" He wanted to know the reason why the boy was crying. The boy would not answer or look up. The boy neither answered nor looked up at Mr. Oliver. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. It seemed that the boy was still crying, and his body continued to be racked, means to be shaking. "Come on, boy, you should not be out here at this hour. Tell me the trouble. Look up." He pleaded the boy to look up, to tell what happened. He further told the boy that he should not be here in the forest at the late hours of that night. He took his hands from his face and looked up at his teacher. The boy removed his hands from his face and looked up at Mr. Oliver. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face, if you could call it a face. So the light of the torch fell on the boy's face. But here the writer says, if you could call it a face. Why won't we call it a face? The writer tells us in the next paragraph. It had no eyes, ears, nose or mouth. Why does the writer wonder that we cannot call it a face? Because the face was a complete bald one, like a bald head. There was no nose, no ears, no eyes, no mouth on the boy's face. It was just a round, smooth head, just as a bald head, with a school cap on top of it. Only there was a cap on the boy's head. And that's where the story should end. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end there. So with the thrilling picture, the story could have ended. But no, the story did not end here. Actually, some more twists await for Mr. Oliver. The torch fell from his trembling hand. He turned and scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. Seeing the bald face, indeed, Mr. Oliver's torch fell from his hand and he took to his heels, means he ran away from there. Means he was running unsteadily and he was also crying for help. He was still running towards the school buildings when he saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. While running towards the school, Mr. Oliver noticed a lantern swinging in the path. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman, gasping for breath. As Mr. Oliver was running in fear and he was running unsteadily also, he kind of struggled to take breath and he reached the watchman somehow. "What is it, Sahib?" asked the watchman. The watchman asked him what had happened. "Has there been an accident? Why are you running?" The watchman asked if there was an accident or something. I saw something horrible, a boy weeping in the forest, and he had no face. Mr. Oliver narrated the whole story to the watchman. He told him that he had met a boy who had no face at all. No face, Sahib? The watchman got astonished. He asked, no face? No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing. Oliver told that there was nothing, no facial features on the boy's face. No ear, no mouth, no eyes, nothing. Do you mean it was like this, Sahib? Asked the watchman, and raised the lamp to his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow, and that's when the wind blew the lamp out. The watchman raised the lamp to his own face and asked if Mr. Oliver had seen a face like this. And see, the watchman had no ears, no eyes, no mouth, and even no eyebrows. It was a completely bald face. So at this very moment, the lamp also goes out. This is where the story ends and leaves a query to the reader's mind what had happened to Mr. Oliver, whether he had died out of a heart attack or something else happened. So you keep imagining what might have happened to Mr. Oliver. So this was the story all about. If you want any questions to be discussed, you can write me in the comment section. I will be there with another video. Till then, keep studying and stay happy.